Have you ever felt it? That strange pull inside your chest, when life seems completely normal on the outside, yet something within you still feels unfinished. You smile, you talk, you move through people, through busy days, through familiar routines, but a quiet part of you keeps waiting for something deeper, something peaceful, something that finally feels real. What if I told you that somewhere in your life there is already a person who no longer sees you as temporary, someone who has moved beyond simple attraction, someone who has quietly started imagining a future with you before even finding the courage to admit it to themselves? Stay with me, because this is not about fantasy or wishful thinking. It is about the quiet way genuine feelings slowly grow. It rarely begins with big words. It rarely starts with dramatic confessions. Instead, it begins with the small moments people usually overlook. A glance that lingers just a little longer. A calm feeling that seems unusual. A comfort that cannot easily be explained. And when that comfort becomes connected to one person, everything slowly begins to change. Keep listening, because what comes next may explain far more than you expect about the connection already forming around you, and about the person whose heart is quietly moving closer to yours. You may be surprised by what you hear, because sometimes the biggest changes begin in complete silence, long before anyone says a single word. Maybe you have experienced emptiness in love before. Maybe you gave your time, your kindness, even your deepest hope, and still walked away feeling invisible. Maybe disappointment taught you to expect less from people. Maybe it made you more careful, more reserved, harder to impress, slower to trust again. That happens more often than people admit. The heart learns something from every painful goodbye, but even when people build walls around themselves, they never stop longing for something steady. Deep inside, they still want a relationship where they can breathe, a connection that does not feel like constant effort, a bond where they do not have to chase, guess, or make themselves smaller just to keep someone close. This is where your presence has quietly become important in someone's inner world, not because you tried to impress them, not because you forced anything to happen, but because you carry something uncommon, a quiet strength, a gentle spirit that never asks for attention, a kindness that speaks without making noise. They notice how you keep moving forward, even when life becomes heavy. They notice how you stay soft without becoming fragile. They notice how you care for others without turning it into a performance. These little things matter much more than most people realize. Stay with me, because this next part may explain why everything has started shifting without you even noticing. Real attachment does not always grow from excitement. Very often it grows from relief, from the feeling that around one person the body can finally relax, the mind can become quiet, and the heart no longer feels the need to wear armor every single day. That is how you slowly entered their emotional world. Naturally, quietly, without one dramatic turning point. At first they may have simply thought you were interesting. Maybe they enjoyed talking with you. Maybe they just noticed that life felt a little lighter whenever you were around, and they did not think much about it. But the human mind remembers peace. The nervous system recognizes safety. Without realizing it, they slowly began connecting your presence with calm. Then little by little, that calm became valuable. Your absence became noticeable. Your messages started carrying more meaning. Your voice mattered. Even the smallest change in your mood stayed with them long after the moment had passed. This is how real emotional attachment grows. Not always through intense passion, sometimes through quiet warmth, not always through emotional storms, sometimes through steady certainty. That is often the strongest kind of connection, because it grows slowly, deeply, and almost without anyone realizing it, until everything has already changed. What makes this even more meaningful is that you may not fully realize how much emotional space you already occupy inside their thoughts. They replay ordinary moments involving you again and again. Conversations that once seemed completely simple now feel much more important in their memory. A joke, a pause, a smile, a shared silence that lasted only a few seconds. The human mind naturally does this when someone becomes emotionally significant. It takes ordinary moments and quietly fills them with meaning. It returns to them, studies them, holds on to them longer than expected. So if their behavior has started feeling different, maybe more thoughtful, more careful, more attentive, and then unexpectedly distant, there is probably a reason. They are no longer dealing with casual interest. They are trying to understand emotions that have become impossible to ignore. They may be questioning themselves every single day, wondering when everything changed, wondering why your opinion suddenly matters so much, wondering why even small interactions with you can affect the rest of their day. Keep watching, because what happens next often surprises even the person experiencing these feelings. This person may already be much closer than you think. It could be someone who has been part of your life for longer than you realize, someone who stayed quiet because they feared ruining the connection that already existed. They may have convinced themselves that staying silent was safer than risking everything and possibly losing you forever. Or it could be someone newer, someone whose connection with you felt unexpectedly comfortable from the very beginning, as though something inside them recognized peace before their mind could understand why. Either way, one truth has slowly taken root inside their heart. You no longer feel temporary, and once that change happens, their imagination changes too. They stop thinking only about special moments with you. Instead, they begin imagining ordinary life together, not unrealistic dreams, something much more real, talking after a difficult day, sharing simple routines, being present during stress, happiness, silence, and healing. They quietly begin wondering what everyday life beside you might actually feel like. That question changes everything, because attraction creates moments, but emotional significance quietly builds a future before either person fully realizes it. They begin asking themselves bigger questions. What would life feel like with this person beside me every day? What if I finally stopped searching? What if peace is not boring after all? What if peace is exactly what real love has been trying to teach me from the beginning? These thoughts often appear when the world becomes quiet. At night, after the distractions fade, your presence becomes even stronger inside their mind. This is where truth becomes harder to escape. In the silence, they replay the way you looked at them. They remember little things you said that seemed ordinary at the time, but somehow carried unexpected warmth. They wonder whether you notice the emotions hiding beneath their quiet behavior. They wonder if you can feel the meaning beneath every conversation, every pause, every moment when your eyes meet for just a second longer than usual. Yet despite everything growing inside them, hesitation still remains. Deep feelings make people vulnerable. They make every possibility feel important. They make every decision carry more weight than before. And sometimes the strongest emotions are the ones that stay silent the longest, quietly waiting for the moment when fear finally becomes smaller than the hope of not losing someone who has already become unforgettable. If you'd like, I can continue with the next section in exactly the same style, pacing, paragraph size, and overall volume. The more someone truly cares, the more aware they become of what they could lose. That awareness creates caution. It can make a person seem slower, more guarded, even difficult to understand. One day they move a little closer, the next day they step back again. Not because the feeling is disappearing, but because it is growing faster than they know how to handle. This matters. So stay with me, because the next part explains everything. Distance does not always mean a lack of interest. Sometimes, distance is simply the nervous system trying to manage what the heart can no longer keep hidden. They want clarity, but they are also afraid of it. They want to speak, yet they know that speaking changes everything. Once feelings are finally named, nothing stays the same. The unknown becomes real. The risk becomes visible. There is no easy way back to pretending, yet remaining silent is starting to cost them more than telling the truth. That is why the pressure inside keeps growing. Every passing day makes it harder to ignore what has already taken root. They keep wondering how long they can stay quiet before their emotions begin showing through their actions. Sometimes they surprise even themselves by how deeply you have settled into their thoughts. That is what happens when feelings stop being casual and begin becoming part of someone's everyday emotional world. There is another reason this connection feels heavier than anything they expected. You represent peace in a life where they may have known mostly confusion. Maybe they have experienced unstable love before, mixed signals, emotional games, exciting highs followed by painful doubt. Many people become so familiar with emotional intensity that they mistake it for real love. Then one day they meet someone different, someone who does not create drama just to prove there is passion, someone who does not make every conversation feel like a test, someone whose presence lowers their defenses instead of increasing their anxiety. That is what you have quietly become for them, a safe place they never expected to find. And when the body begins connecting one person with safety, the attachment grows much deeper than simple attraction. It becomes comfort. It becomes emotional balance. It becomes rest after a long journey. It becomes the feeling of finally coming home inside another person's presence. Keep listening, because this is where the story begins changing, in ways neither of you may have expected. Sometimes the strongest emotional bonds are built so quietly that people only realize their depth after they have already become impossible to ignore. Maybe you understand this kind of emotional exhaustion too. Maybe you reached a point where disappointment felt more familiar than peace. Maybe a part of you slowly stopped expecting anything lasting, because temporary connections kept teaching the same painful lesson again and again. But this bond carries a different feeling. It is not built on noise. It is built on steadiness. It does not demand constant proof. It quietly creates trust. Sometimes the deepest love begins exactly there, in the place where the heart finally stops preparing for another heartbreak. Stay with me, because this next part could explain the changes you have already noticed. Even the silence between you has started feeling different. It is no longer empty. It carries meaning. Eye contact says more than words ever could. A simple pause feels full of emotion. An ordinary moment suddenly becomes unforgettable without either of you knowing why. Most emotional changes happen long before people ever speak about them. They appear in attention, in timing, in the way one person begins noticing every small detail about the other. That quiet awareness slowly grows until even the smallest interaction begins carrying unexpected emotional weight. The more this person tried to control what they were feeling, the more obvious those feelings became inside them. That is one of the strange truths about deep emotions. What people resist often grows stronger instead of fading away. Instead of becoming less important, you became more present in their thoughts. Instead of becoming easier to manage, the connection became impossible to overlook. Your attention lifts their mood without you realizing it. Your silence makes them think longer than they expected. Even a delayed reply can stay in their mind for hours. A warm conversation can brighten their entire day. This is not a small emotional effect. This is influence. And once one person begins affecting another at that level, the connection is no longer casual. It matters deeply. It shapes how they experience ordinary life. That is why they sometimes seem conflicted, close one day, careful the next. Their mind keeps trying to protect them, while their heart has already started moving toward you. They are balancing hope against fear, desire against caution, longing against the possibility of losing something that has become incredibly valuable. Keep watching, because emotional truth cannot stay hidden forever. Real connection changes people from the inside long before anyone else notices. It reshapes what they value. It changes the future they imagine. It softens old defenses while bringing hidden fears into the light. And in their case, one fear now stands above all the others. It is no longer only the fear of rejection, although that feeling is still there. It is something even deeper, the fear that you may not feel the same way. The fear that by finally speaking honestly, they could lose not only hope, but also the connection they already have with you. That is why they pause before sending certain messages, why they rewrite simple words, why they pay closer attention to your reactions than they ever did before. When emotions become serious, people naturally begin looking for signs that they are safe. They search for consistency. They search for warmth. They search for quiet signs that the door is still open. And recently something small may have changed everything inside them. Perhaps it was the way you looked at them, the softness in your voice, the moment you understood them without needing a long explanation. It may have looked ordinary from the outside, but inside them it awakened something powerful. Hope. Hope is powerful because once it enters, fear no longer has complete control. A person can survive uncertainty for a long time. But when hope appears, everything begins shifting. They start imagining what might happen if they finally became brave enough to trust what they feel. Then one question quietly takes over their thoughts. What if this is real? What if these feelings are not one-sided? What if the connection I feel already exists inside the other person too? Once that question takes root, it refuses to disappear. It follows them into quiet evenings, ordinary routines, familiar streets, songs they hear unexpectedly, and those small empty moments during the day when the mind begins wandering. Without realizing it, they start collecting little pieces of evidence. The way conversations with you flow naturally, the way silence beside you never feels uncomfortable, the way emotional closeness appears without pressure or effort. These are not ordinary details anymore. For someone who has spent years protecting their heart, they become meaningful signs. And those signs slowly become the fuel that keeps hope alive. Stay with me because the next shift changes everything. The walls they spent years building begin weakening without them fully noticing. Now they catch themselves imagining moments they never intended to imagine, walking beside you without emotional distance, sharing parts of life they normally keep hidden from everyone else, building something slow, steady, and genuine instead of chasing something intense but unstable. That change is enormous. It means you are no longer someone they simply think about from time to time. You have become someone they naturally place inside the future they quietly picture in their mind. Listen carefully, because this part matters more than most people realize. Once a person begins including you in their future, the emotional connection has already crossed an important line. It is no longer driven by simple curiosity. It is guided by possibility. And possibility changes everything. Every conversation feels more meaningful. Every meeting feels more important. Every goodbye lingers a little longer. Now they are no longer only aware of their feelings. They are beginning to understand what those feelings could become. If they finally find the courage to let their heart speak louder than their fear, they are no longer thinking only about what they feel. Now they are quietly wondering about what you feel too. They listen closely to your tone. They replay your words long after the conversation ends. They ask themselves whether the connection they sense is visible in your eyes as well. That uncertainty does not weaken the bond. In many cases it makes it even stronger because the heart naturally moves toward what feels deeply meaningful and almost within reach. Stay with me, because this next part explains why everything has become more intense. Real emotional chemistry is rarely loud. It usually reveals itself through small changes that most people overlook. One person mirrors the other without realizing it. Attention naturally increases. Eye contact lasts just a little longer. Their presence begins feeling brighter, even when nothing dramatic is happening. Slowly, both people begin sensing that something has changed. They have noticed those quiet shifts with you, and they have affected them far more deeply than they ever expected. They keep asking themselves whether you have noticed the same invisible pull. Sometimes they almost convince themselves that you have. Other times doubt returns. That emotional back and forth has quietly become part of their everyday thoughts. Now the smallest things bring you back into their mind. A familiar song suddenly reminds them of you. A quiet room unexpectedly fills with your memory. An ordinary pause during the day somehow becomes connected to your presence without any clear reason. This is what happens when someone becomes emotionally important. The brain begins giving them priority without asking for permission. Your face, your voice, your words, your mood, even your absence naturally moves to the front of their thoughts. That is why distracting themselves no longer works the way it used to. They can stay busy all day, yet somehow your memory still finds its way back. If their behavior has recently seemed more thoughtful, more intentional, or more emotionally careful, there is a reason for it. They are feeling much more than they know how to express. There have already been moments when they almost told you everything. Moments when the truth reached the edge of becoming spoken, only for fear to quietly pull it back again. Not because their feelings are uncertain. Quite the opposite. They have become so certain that taking the risk suddenly feels much bigger. Do not miss this, because sometimes the clearest feelings are the hardest ones to say out loud. When someone realizes just how deeply another person affects their emotional world, every possible outcome begins feeling larger than before. Every choice carries more weight. Every conversation suddenly matters. That is exactly where they are now. One simple thought changed everything inside them. They imagined what life would feel like if they completely lost you. Not just missing an opportunity, truly losing your presence. Watching life continue while everything meaningful stayed locked inside them forever. That thought hit harder than they expected. In that moment, something became impossible to deny. This connection is no longer optional in their emotional life. The possibility of loss felt real, and real loss often reveals real attachment. Many people never fully understand their own emotions until they picture life without the person who has quietly become essential to them. That single image created a level of clarity they had never experienced before. Now the question is no longer, do I care? They already know the answer. The real question has become, what happens if I stay silent for too long? Keep listening, because that question is slowly pushing them toward honesty, whether they are ready or not. Without fully realizing it, you have changed something important inside them. You made emotional stability feel attractive again. You made gentleness feel safe, instead of risky. You made them believe that love does not always have to come with confusion. That closeness does not have to include emotional games. That consistency can exist without fear. These are not small changes happening inside a person. Once someone begins choosing peace over emotional chaos because of one particular connection, that connection starts shaping the direction of their entire heart. Even the people around them may be noticing the difference. Maybe they seem more thoughtful lately, a little quieter, softer in the way they speak, more present than before. Real emotional attachment leaves quiet signs before it ever becomes words. It changes the atmosphere around a person long before they openly admit what they feel. Deep inside, they are beginning to understand that these emotions are not temporary. They are growing stronger. They are becoming part of who they are. Stay with me, because the next shift is where everything begins moving toward a real decision. What makes this connection even more powerful is that they no longer see it as simple attraction. Attraction can be intense, but it can also fade with time. What they feel now goes much deeper. It feels like compatibility, like peace, like emotional balance, like something strong enough to survive real life, instead of only existing in beautiful moments. That is why their thoughts have slowly changed from asking, "What does this feel like?" to wondering, "What could this become?" For the first time, a future with you no longer feels unrealistic. It feels possible, serious, worth protecting, worth taking a risk for. But before they finally speak the truth, one last fear continues holding on, the fear of letting go of control. Because once they tell you how they feel, they cannot control what happens next. They can only open their heart and wait. That is frightening for anyone who has learned to survive by staying emotionally guarded. Yet another fear is quietly becoming even stronger than that one. The fear of missing something real, simply because silence felt safer. That fear keeps growing every single day. It becomes strongest during the quiet hours, especially at night, when there is nothing left to distract the mind. They imagine a future where you slowly drift away without ever knowing what lived inside their heart. They imagine you building a life somewhere emotionally distant while they remain carrying everything they never had the courage to say. That picture creates regret before anything has even been lost. And regret has a way of forcing emotional truth into the light. It removes excuses. It strips away every reason for hiding. It asks one difficult question that becomes harder to avoid with every passing day. If this matters so much, why keep pretending it does not? Maybe you have already sensed this change, even though nothing has been spoken aloud. Maybe their attention feels more focused whenever you speak. Maybe they seem more emotionally present, as though they are listening for much more than your words. Maybe even the quiet moments between you feel heavier now, as though something meaningful is waiting beneath the surface. That feeling is real. Emotional truth has been building quietly for longer than either of you realized. They can no longer treat your impact as something small. You have changed the way they think about love itself. They are beginning to choose depth instead of drama, honesty instead of appearances, steadiness instead of temporary excitement. That kind of inner change is rare, and once it begins, it is very difficult to turn back. Someone close to them may have already noticed the difference. A friend, a family member, someone who quietly recognized the change in their mood or the softness in their voice. Perhaps they were asked, "What has changed about you lately?" Maybe they smiled without meaning to. Maybe they avoided giving a direct answer. Maybe they never said your name at all. But the truth was already there beneath every word. There is someone in my life who makes everything feel different. Someone who has quietly become more important than I ever expected. And whether they realize it yet or not, that quiet truth is slowly becoming too strong to remain hidden forever. Keep watching, because the next step in this story may arrive much sooner than either of you imagined. Someone who makes love feel less tiring. Someone who makes openness seem possible again. That is what genuine emotional bonds often do. They do not simply create attraction. They quietly reshape priorities. They make a person want to become more honest, more present, more emotionally open than they have been in a very long time. And once someone begins moving in that direction because of you, the distance between what they feel and what they finally say becomes smaller with every passing day. Stay with me, because this next part explains why that silence cannot last forever. There are still moments when fear returns at the very last second. That is one of the strange realities of deep attachment. The more someone matters, the more carefully we try to protect ourselves from the possibility of losing them. So there are times when they almost tell you everything, and then they stop. Times when vulnerability rises to the surface, only to quietly pull back again. Not because they question their feelings, but because they know those feelings have become too valuable to risk without care. Every passing day makes it harder to keep pretending that nothing has changed. The heart has already made a decision, even if the words are still catching up. And that quiet truth is becoming impossible for them to ignore. Something important is beginning to change inside them now, slowly, quietly, but in a way that cannot be reversed. They are starting to realize that emotional control is not the same as emotional safety. For a long time they believed that staying silent would protect them, that hiding their feelings would keep everything stable.